All right, welcome back. It's chapter 13, last chapter of the school year. Here we go. We're going to review some things from right triangle trigonometry, and here we are. So the one thing to remember SOHCAHTOA. That tells us the ratios of those sides of right triangles. Remember, we could the sine is the opposite of the hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So there we go. We have those ratios. So if we get a right triangle, we can set up those values very easily. Again, we always have to know our reference angle, which angle we're referring to, and a lot of times we use the Greek letter theta. Here's theta right here, so what we're going to do is we're going to say that the opposite is 7 over hypotenuse 25. For cosine, it's the adjacent side 24 over the hypotenuse 25, and the tangent is the opposite over the adjacent, so we'd have 7 over 24. Okay, along those same lines, always make sure you know which angle we're talking about. Here it is, theta right here. So opposite this time is 30, adjacent, or hypotenuse is 34. For cosine, the adjacent is 16 over 34 hypotenuse, and the tangent is the opposite over the adjacent, so 30 over 16. All right, so we have those properties to work with, and again, we can always use the Pythagorean theorem if we know two sides to find a third side. That's always a good way if it's a right triangle. All right, and some other things to remember is that we had these special triangles. We had a 30-60 right triangle where, remember, the side opposite the 30 is half of the hypotenuse. And to get the side opposite the 60, you take the side opposite 30, multiply it by the square root of 3. If it's a 45-45 right triangle, we know these two sides are equal, and then to get the hypotenuse, we'd multiply by the square root of 2. That's how you get those. Remember those properties here. All right, so a couple simple little problems here. If we have a situation like this, hey, I know the hypotenuse is 74. If this angle is 30, well, we know that has to be 60, but the side opposite 30 is half, 37. Easy. Now, we know to get the hypotenuse, if it's a 45-45 right triangle, we know we take the side and multiply it by the square root of 2. So if we know the hypotenuse to get the side opposite the 45, we would divide by the square root of 2, and we have that. Okay, so just some different ways of using those special properties that we've learned before. Now, setting up problems like this, you kind of have to figure out which trig function to use, and you can't just use it willy-nilly. You got to think about what you have. Okay, so here's the angle I know. I want to know the opposite side, and I don't know the hypotenuse. Sorry, so we'd have to use the sine because that's the one that deals with opposite and hypotenuse. So we'd set up the problem. Sine of the angle is 15.1. Opposite over hypotenuse, and then we just crisscross multiply here, and we'd know that h is 19 times the sine of 15.1. Again, always answer the question to the nearest foot, so we'd round that to 5 feet. All right, some other things to keep in mind as we look here. Remember, angle of depression is this angle here. If you're looking straight out, it's the angle you look down. The angle of elevation would be from the straight line across from where your eyes are. It's the angle that you look up. Remember those as we might label some questions and problems here. All right, looking at another one here. Here's the biologist. Now, this is a sneaky one because the eye is already 6 feet off the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to end up adding that onto our value here. Basically, we're running the triangle right through here, and we're going to have to add that 6 feet on. But in this case, we want to know the opposite, and we know the adjacent. So what we want to do is set up the tangent of 38.7. Crisscross multiply there. Here we go. 180 times 38.7. That gives you 144.2. So when you add it to 6, you get 150.2. But again, it did say to the nearest foot, so we'd say about 150 feet is what we'd have there. All right. Some other things that we have. There are actually 3 more trig functions that we have. You don't see them on the calculator, and here's why. If you take a look, the cotangent is really just the reciprocal of the tangent. So if you know the tangent, just flip it around and you got the cotangent. Now, the secant is the reciprocal of the cosine. And then the cosecant is the reciprocal of the sine. So again, all you have to do is find those first 3, and then the next 3 follow by just doing reciprocals. Here's an example of what we're talking about. So what I did here is I had these two sides. I used the Pythagorean theorem to figure out the third side, and again, that was 74. So now that you got all 3 sides, well, look at what you got. Here's the angle. Opposite over hypotenuse is the sine. Adjacent over hypotenuse is the cosine. And opposite over adjacent is the tangent. Well, now it's real easy because the cotangent, just flip the tangent around. The secant, just flip and do the reciprocal of the cosine. And then the cosecant, just flip the sine. So once you get those first 3, the rest follow. All right, so again, hopefully some review a little bit. Go back through those. We got some nice worksheets on 13.1. Check them. Make sure you got those all right. And then, like I said, we'll be back next time. So until next time, I'm Mr. Boone.